it's a good idea. You could.
I think we'll get started now. My name is Ann McClay, and Breast Cancer Resource Network, and I've asked several women who are survivors of breast cancer to come tonight to share their personal experiences and how more appropriately this has affected their lives since they've pretty much reached a plateau after treatment. Before I came this evening was look over Susan Love's breast book, and I haven't done that for a long time. And what I was looking for were kind of the conditions under which we all came to breast cancer were not the same, but there are some similarities in sort of stages or phases of behavior or feelings or events that we have in common. I wanted to kind of set this up for you so that you'd have an idea where we're going and what we're talking about. When people get a diagnosis of breast cancer in particular, it is unusual that in that there are usually no symptoms. So it's a bigger shock than maybe a broken leg would be where you have an actual symptom. It's usually by mammography or some equally mystical thing that we come to this diagnosis. Some of us find lumps. I know that that's not always true. But there is a sort of a sense of disbelief in this shock that we feel, and I really sense a sense of real anger, of body betrayal, of the idea that we thought things were fine and they're not. And there's also, she describes it as a sense of horror, which is cut it off, I want it done, I want to not hear about it again. There's a second phase which she calls investigating options, and we all know what that means. The third phase is that she calls treatment, and each of us has chosen, I think, our own treatments pretty much. They've been given as a series of events to us to which we either agree or don't. After the treatment, there is another phase which usually is likened to a postpartum depression. I really have a hard time with the idea of postpartum depression and breast cancer, but it's a time where you've focused on yourself, you've done a lot of things for yourself, and all of a sudden that's over, and you have to take a look at not doing something positively. Treatment was something you could actually do for yourself. When that's done, there's kind of a sagging time, and I think all of us have a sense of that. I'm not sure how big a problem it has been for all of us. During that time, there's a lot of fear brought up of what's happening in the future. The intensity of feelings is usually remarkably increased. People go through assessments of their lives, how things have gone in the past, and maybe make changes they have been meaning to make or want to make for the future. There's another phase that she calls I can't trust my body phase, which involves hearing articles on the newspaper, for instance, or like today, I noticed that there was a resolution to that issue about whether or not a lumpectomy and radiation or chemotherapy was as good as a mastectomy. And they've now finally gotten some hard data that says the statistics seem to be the same. But for a while, people were shaken about that. And I think that came up when they had recognized and admitted to lying about some of the data in an earlier study. So these things do impinge on our lives, and how we handle them adds or doesn't add stress to us. The issue of recurrence starts this whole process all over again. And we all look at that with I'm sure a certain amount of anxiety. And those people who have had recurrences have had to do this, more than once. The other thing that she brought out was that there are a lot of issues that come up which we don't expect, like old issues, old things we never dealt with. One example she used was how you deal with your children. If you have problems already with your kids and then dump the information and the stress of the cancer and the treatment on it, these things don't resolve themselves. They usually get worse, and often there is a crisis which has to be headed off or dealt with. So one of the other issues is isolation. I know that's why Breast Cancer Resource Network came to being, was through a support group to break this isolation and also to share with other people, and however they could receive it, information and news and sort of a gentle support. It is not a support group situation, but it does serve that for many people. Tonight we have several folks here. I'm sure some of them you know, some of you don't. We have Myrna O'Hare, Karen Townsend, Kerry Dewey, Sam Gursky, and Carol Heath. And Carol is new to our group. She hasn't been here before, but I've met her when we were both sharing the green needle or the chemotherapy bay. That's when I first met her, and she has been brave enough to say she'd be glad to start. And I'll let you fill in on her fill you in on her history. And thank you, Carol. You do whatever you want.
I'll stay sitting down here. Yeah, my name's Carol Heath. I'm 37 years old. I'm a nurse. I work here at St. Pat's Hospital. I could talk for hours about what I've been through, but we have to keep it pretty brief. First of all, I'd like to say that I am a survivor, and I call myself the walking, talking miracle. I was first found a lump in my left breast in December of '92 and had a lumpectomy. It was very small. It was very slow-growing cancer. I then had lymph node surgery. I only had 1 out of 17 lymph nodes that was positive for cancer. They said it was a very microscopic amount. I also had a biopsy in my right breast, and that was negative. I then had 6 months of chemotherapy, adriamycin, cytoxin, 5-FU twice a month for the 6 months. Then I had radiation for about 7 weeks to my left breast. And so I was done with treatment in about August, in the middle of August of like 1993. I was told that I probably had about an 85 to 95% chance of having been cured, and they were very optimistic that I would never see this again. Unfortunately, not more than a year after that, in probably end of July of '94, I found another lump again, and both times I was the one who found it. In fact, I had had a mammogram about the month before, and it did not show a single thing. And so I found this lump. The first one was over here. The second time it was up here. It was in a completely different spot. Saw my oncologist, and he didn't really think it was anything and sent me home. And I kept going back and bugging him and started bugging my surgeon, and I know they thought I was a true pain, but then I noticed an enlarged lymph node in my neck, and it was in straight alignment with this lump. And at that point, I knew myself, I was pretty sure that the cancer was back. And as soon as I told them about the lymph node too, they said, yeah, we better check this out. So I had surgery in August 26th of '93. They were both cancer. The one in my breast, it was still a small lump, but they did not get clean margins. They did not get all the cancer out, but the one in my neck, they did. They told me that just statistics showed that someone like me that had a recurrence this quickly, that I was going to die with traditional chemotherapy. That they probably wouldn't even be able to keep the cancer away, or if they did for a little while, it'd be right back. The cancer this time was extremely aggressive. They said they could almost see it multiplying on the slide when they were looking at it in the microscope. And I said that I almost felt like I could feel it growing just in the short time that from when I had first found it till they took it out. I said, I swear it was getting bigger in my chest, that I was feeling it. And they said, you probably were. So they said my only chance of survival was high-dose chemo with stem cell transplant. And when I first heard about the recurrence, I was terrified. I thought, I am going to die. And there was probably a good week there where I just had this terrible ache in my heart, and it just wouldn't go away. And I just thought, oh, what in the world am I going to do? And then when I had made the decision to go for the treatment, that kind of went away, and all my energy went into the treatment and trying to be happy and trying to go on with my life. I quickly called around and made decisions about where I was going to go for treatment. I decided to go to City of Hope in California. It's a hospital about the size of St. Pat's, but all they do is treatment on cancer patients. And so I went down there October 31st to have my stem cells drawn. I was very lucky. It only took 3 days to do that. And then I was admitted November 16th for the high-dose chemo and got out December 11th. Have to admit that it was hell. And at times you thought they were going to kill you just trying to treat you. But I overall did very well through the treatment. They were very impressed at how quickly I recovered and how well I was doing. A month after that, I went back down. I came home, then went back down to City of Hope again. January 16th of this year, and had mastectomy with abdominal free flap reconstruction surgery, where they make a breast for you out of abdominal tissue. And that surgery took 10 hours. It was a long surgery. They don't do this specific kind of reconstruction surgery here. They do some of the abdominal ones. There's 3 different ones, but not this one. I then came home and had 5 weeks of radiation to my neck. I just got done with that March 24th. And may possibly go back to City of Hope again in June for nipple reconstruction surgery. I am back to work. I am very happy. I'm exercising. The doctors are very amazed and think, wow, I mean, maybe this truly worked on this woman. I saw my oncologist about a week ago. I don't have to go back for 2 months. I don't have to see a doctor for 2 whole months, which is truly amazing to me after seeing one about every day for 6 months. That's kind of a brief history of what's happened to me. They wanted to know what would I do differently and how with my care. I'd say about halfway through my care, I became very assertive with how I wanted things done, and I wish it would have been that way from day one. Sometimes I think I was seen as kind of a pain. Towards the end, I always came with a whole list of questions. I wanted to be very knowledgeable about what was happening to me. I was pushing for things to be done one right after the other. I didn't want lapses in between treatments. I was afraid that if there was much of a lapse, then my cancer might have a chance to spread somewhere else or go somewhere. And so I was constantly saying, okay, when are you going to give me the next appointment? When are you going to set me up for this? And I'm very glad I did that. And wish that when I first found, when I had the recurrence and first found that lump initially, that I would have not walked away from that office that first time. I would have said, well, I feel something here and I'm concerned, and let's go ahead and do something now, before it went to my neck. Well, what else I wanted to know is how it's changed my attitudes, my lifestyle, my relationships, and what I see for the future. This has affected me a lot. It's like I love life, and life is precious to me. And I have realized how truly important my friends and my family are. Everyone was wonderful to me. They gave me gifts. They sent me cards. They had a party for me when I left. I am engaged to be married, and Kelly, my fiancé, is here today. We were not engaged when I had the recurrence, when I was diagnosed with the recurrence, and I said to him, you can end this relationship if you want. I would not be angry with you. I may die, and I don't know what's going to happen, and this is going to be a rough road. And he said, no, I am not leaving you. I'm going to stand by you through this whole thing, and he was great. And on Christmas Day, we got engaged, and we're going to be married August 19th. My mom, my sister, and brother-in-law were wonderful to me, and my friends. One thing I guess that I really want to stress is that it's very easy to get, I think, depressed and down and to be worrying all the time. I would be lying to you if I said I wasn't afraid that my cancer might come back again. I am afraid, but I try not to dwell on it and spend a lot of time on it. I try to be happy and active and go out and do things. I feel like that's a waste of my time to be sad, that I don't know how much time I have left, and so I have to spend every moment of it doing as many things as I can and being happy as I can, and that's truly important. And another thing that I did is, during this whole ordeal, I sent probably about 4 letters out. I wrote letters explaining to people what I was going through, the procedures. What is high-dose chemo stem cell transplant? Most of the public does not even know what that is, what it's about. I explained it and made copies and wrote letters to friends and relatives, and I got extremely positive feedback about that. People saying, I never understood all this. This is, I'm glad you explained this. I never realized, you never think about, oh, my friend, my neighbor, my best bud's going to be the one who's going to get this, which is what you were. And so it was kind of almost my mission to let people know what this was about, and that we need to support research in breast cancer. And that I'd also like to give a little plug for Missoula Cancer Society, because they also were supportive of me and helped me out through this ordeal. So I'd just like to say that I am doing well, that I'm hopeful for the future. I hope to be here a long time. And I have a couple pictures here to pass around that were taken when I was in California with the high-dose chemo to show how sick I really was and how healthy I look now compared to them. So, thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Sam, we'll go right next with Sam Gursky.
I'm Sam Gursky, as Ann said, and I'm 52 years old. And I first discovered my lump in January of '91. I had been monitoring another lump, and I had previously had about 3 cysts removed in the 10 years before that. This one seemed to suddenly appear right beside the one we were monitoring. So I called my doctor and went in, and he said, "It's a lump and not much else. We'll watch it for a while." So we watched it for about 5 months, and I got kind of nervous about it. Thank you. I don't know exactly why, because I really couldn't tell that something was happening with it, unlike you could in your situation. But I went back in a little early, and he said it had grown and we'd better take it out. And he had me come into his office, and this was my general practitioner, because it was right on the surface, and it was on the inner upper quadrant of my left breast, which is a little unusual. And being right on the surface, he felt he could take it out. So we went in, and with a local, he took it out, and I went home and waited for a call. And because I'd had 3 cysts removed and they'd all been benign, I don't think I was really too worried, or maybe I fooled myself a little bit, I don't know. But I got the call a couple hours later, and I happened to be alone home when the call came, which turned out to be really hard. And he said, "You have cancer." And I said, "What?" And he said, "You have cancer." And I said, "But..." And I started walking around in this little circle with my telephone, and I kept saying, "But the mammogram didn't show anything. The mammogram didn't show anything." And I happened to be one of those women that the mammogram doesn't work for. So, and I understood that later better after we had a speaker here that described the difficulties with reading mammograms, etc. But up until then, just a couple of months ago, I had a real hard time understanding why a 3.5 centimeter lump wouldn't show. But it was very large. I immediately had to go to another surgeon because he hadn't got it all. There was a positive margin. So the 26th of June, I had the first surgery. Second surgery was scheduled for the 3rd of July. In between, I saw radiologists and oncologists and talked to them and read everything I could get my hands on. I was offered the possibility of going on to a test, one of those protocol programs for testing various cancer treatments. These were all standard approaches to cancer treatment with 3 chemotherapy drugs and either tamoxifen or not tamoxifen. And I agreed to go on to that, even though I knew it probably wouldn't help me. But somewhere down the line, maybe it'll be a good enough test that it'll help one of our kids or one of our grandkids. So I felt pretty strongly about that, and I went ahead and went on it. And the drugs that were chosen for me were adriamycin, Cytoxan, 5-FU, and no tamoxifen. Even though I was a candidate for it, I had, in spite of the 3.5 centimeter tumor, clean lymph nodes, which was pretty surprising. And I also had estrogen receptor positive, which was a good thing too. And at the time, I really didn't know what my prognosis was. I think I was so busy struggling to understand what had happened, and kind of getting started with the treatment. I had to go into chemo pretty quickly at that point, and my radiation was after my chemo. I went through 7 months of chemotherapy and 2 months of radiation, and was fortunate in that I wasn't ill in the usual sense. I did have problems with mouth sores and wasn't able to eat for a couple of months, was barely able to swallow, but they lowered doses and got that under control, and then I started eating again and made up for it big time. When I was through with the treatment, my liver function tests were still off, and they were off for 2 years after my treatment. I don't know what happened. Nobody knows what went on, but about a year ago, they became normal and have remained normal in the last year. So that took one edge of fear away from me. How has it changed me? I've been really fortunate, I think. Nobody that I knew, family or friends, withdrew from me because of the fear of how to handle me and my disease. I had everyone sort of wrapped themselves around me like a blanket. It was just wonderful. I married a man with 5 grown children, and it's like they adopted me. And it was wonderful. They were all so good to me and so loving and kind. And friends were just amazing, just amazing. And I work for Missoula County, and there's about 500 employees. And I was real active in the Employees Council, and people started calling me up that I didn't even know and telling me the most wonderful survival stories. And that was so helpful to me because, as you know, fear is so tough to deal with when you're told you had cancer. I thought I was going to die, and the tumor was so large that was really fearful for me. I remember getting all my finances all together so that, you know, when this happened, Red wouldn't have to deal with some of my financial things that didn't seem to be like they should be his. And I also learned how to value life, every single precious second, and everyone in my life, and to and learn that you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. There's no way. It's sort of like a crapshoot, no matter what you do, you know. I thought I was healthy, and I wasn't. I was lucky. The tumor was slow growing, even though it was so large. The doctor said garden variety was the word he used, which I thought was kind of interesting, and I was grateful to hear it. I just try to make each good day better, and I want to experience also as much as I can within financial restraints. That's what messes you up, you know. And when I was through with the treatment, we knew that, at least for now, everything was all right. And that summer, we went to New York, and we went to Alaska, and went to California, and did as much fun things as we could do, crammed them all into that summer. I had lost my hair, so I had very short hair at that time, and I don't look very good with very short hair. It wasn't appealing at all, but I was so glad to have it back, I didn't care. It was one of the harder things to deal with, I think, that I dealt with during the chemo. It was such a visible reminder of the illness that I was dealing with, and was frightening and horrible. And I have this husband with a very warped sense of humor, and he had this knack for making me laugh about it, which was, I think, really a blessing. And I am thankful for that every day. He took a picture of me with numbers on my chest. Yes, so that I could show my criminal background, you know. Like I said, he's got a warped sense of humor. Would I have done anything differently? I'm really not sure. You know, I really didn't know the prognosis until 2 weeks ago, because I was so busy learning what I could about the disease and fighting in every way I could think of at that time. I didn't ever ask him for a specific number. I was worried about the cancer being aggressive, but I never asked him for numbers. So 2 weeks ago, I called Dr. Trausch because of this tonight and said, what exactly was my prognosis? And I'm sure he thought I'd lost it. Here I am 3.5 years down the road. And so I explained what I was doing, and I think maybe it's better I didn't ask at the time, because I found out it was like 50-50 odds of survival. And with chemo, the studies about them have been really not real clear, so that maybe added 15% to me. And I think maybe had I known it at the time, that would have added really a lot more fear than I was dealing with already, and I don't know whether I could have dealt with that very well or not. I knew the tumor was large, but I think that I thought the good, you know, the clean nodes and the estrogen receptor thing was so good that it would offset it, and it really didn't. I might have pushed for the tamoxifen to be added to my treatment. had I known, but I didn't really know very much about tamoxifen. I hadn't really heard of any of the drugs. I just read what it said in the papers they gave me, and that, wasn't as detailed as since I know. And I still question the lack of tamoxifen, but the study didn't choose that for me. So, and it's far enough past now that it's not enough to be really concerned about unless something changes in the future. So, and I do still believe that the studies are so important, because if they don't have people that will go on them, how are they ever going to know if the various treatments work? So I accepted that choice, and I still believe it was the right choice. I made the best choices I could at the time. I think that's all any of us can do. In the future, as time goes by and things appear to be good with me, I feel more hope all the time. I gained 30 pounds while I was learning to eat again after my mouth healed, and all the time since then, the weight has never bothered me. Until about 2 weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, I didn't even care about the weight. I was just glad to be alive. And I think somewhere in my mind, there's this little thing saying to me, you might live now, it's okay, you can worry about your weight. So now I started worrying about your weight. So anyway, I believe in tomorrow more than I did 3.5 years ago, and I'm sure I'll believe in it more tomorrow. And all in all, I feel that I gained more than I lost because of the things I discovered about myself and about my feelings about life and about the people who love me and who I love. Those were all such positive things that I might not have ever learned them any other way. It's a hard way to learn them, but it was still a gift. And the day that I finished my radiation, I wrote a poem about the treatment and about the struggle, and I shared it with a number of people. I haven't gotten it out for quite a while, and I got it out yesterday. And I think to end my little talk, it'd be good to read that to you. And I'll tell you right now, I still feel the same way. So I called it Struggle. Good health was just a part of my life, something I always took for granted, till one day, cancer was found. Such a shock it was. How could it be? That sort of thing could never happen to me. But it did. It did. The days became wrapped up in the struggle to survive. Tests and tests, drugs and more drugs. The hair disappeared from my head. Month after month, the fight went on. Then came the time to radiate, another kind of fight added to the battle. Day after day, radiate, radiate. How could my body stand it all? Tired, achy, ill. On and on it went. My vanity, my modesty, my body, all paid a price bowing to this battle. Doctors poking and prodding time after time, with me fighting to keep my days normal. Through it all, one thing was clear. Family, friends, people I hardly knew, supported me with love and kindness. They were everywhere, giving me strength, day after day, day after day. Now it has come to an end. I face each day with hope and a prayer that it was all enough to keep me safe and let me see tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. In spite of all the fear and the struggle, I know in my heart that I gained much more than I lost. The love and the kindness of good people surrounded me. They gave such support, faith, and hope. Such wonderful people. It is a joy to know them all. So many thanks come from my heart to all of yours, to all of yours. Thank you.
Well, I'm inspired. Hi, Kerry Dewey here. You may call me a cancer survivor. I often call myself that, although most of the time I think of myself as a thriver. I haven't just survived cancer. I have thrived because of it. Not thrived on it, but I feel I've thrived because of it. And I've heard hundreds of stories of other survivors. Sometimes it strikes me how different the stories are, but most often it strikes me how similar things are too. And I'm hearing that again tonight. So many things are similar from one person to another. But still the stories are different. I'm going to
try to give you the 25-word or less version of my story, which goes back to 1984. I found a lump in my breast when I was pregnant with my second child. It was in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. I pointed it out to my OB/GYN, who reassured me it was nothing, because pregnant women my age don't get breast cancer, so not to worry about it, go have my baby. Which I did, delivered a healthy daughter. And after the delivery, I said, I'm trying to nurse, and I still have this little lump here. Well, let's look at it. Well, mammograms showed nothing, and ultrasound showed nothing. And then I made what could be the mistake of my life. I listened to the doctor when he said, don't worry about it, let's just watch it. And listening to Carol talk about hindsight, in hindsight, that's the one thing I wish I could have changed. I wish I had been assertive at that point and said, no, but I didn't. Too late to change that now. So I went home with my baby and my lump and came back a year later. And at that time I said, I've weaned my baby, but I still have this lump, and oh, big surprise, it's bigger. Well, then the ball got rolling, more tests, and finally an excisional biopsy. And I was found to have invasive intraductal breast cancer at age 34. I was 2 centimeters in size. I was not happy, as you might guess, with the OB/GYN who misdiagnosed it originally. I was not happy with the surgeon who did the biopsy. I fired them both, said, I never want to see you again, and went doctor shopping. And that's when my life education began. I got a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th opinion, and I started to educate myself about what I was up against. It took 4 weeks to make my treatment decision. I chose to have mastectomy. I had 26 lymph nodes removed, and by the grace of God, none were positive. I declined elective chemotherapy, so I had surgery alone. Crossed my fingers and prayed and went about my life. I had 2 young children to raise. Bounced back from the surgery quickly and look forward. I look forward. Along the lines there, 3 years after my surgery, I chose to have breast reconstruction and am now the proud owner of a silicone implant, which has never given me any trouble. I don't lose sleep in hindsight. It was a good decision for me. I do not regret it. I've had no problems. And felt great about myself. I felt great. Until September of '93, I didn't feel so great. And after about 3 weeks of feeling ill, I took myself to the doc, said, I don't feel very well, and test and test and test and test. And within a week, I discovered that my breast cancer had recurred. Recurrent breast cancer metastasized to my liver. I knew it wasn't good news. And the look on my doctor's face told me it was indeed very bad news. Well, I went home and, lost sleep, did the crying, all that bit, and then geared myself up and went back in. So all right, this is what we're going to do. In the years between, I learned a lot about being assertive and empowerment. Said, I'm going to call shots here. And I'm going to be the executive producer of this show, and if you're real good, Doc, I'll let you be the director. And he laughed. He knew me by that time. He said, that's fine with me. What do you want to do? I said, let's find a clinical trial. I said, I know that I'm in for some heavy-duty stuff if I want to fight this. But my hope is that somebody somewhere can learn from what I'm about to go through. So we searched the literature, searched and searched. I said, you know, the one thing that I'm really interested in, that Taxol sounds good to me. And he kind of rolled his eyes, but we kept looking. And I found one that I liked, that he didn't complain about too much, and that would accept me. And that was Washington, D.C. at the National Cancer Institute. So on the 1st of November in '93, I went back east, visited with them there, found I was eligible, and gave myself over as a guinea pig to the feds for a clinical trial. It was supposed to have all the treatment there. I had 2 treatments there. The treatment was 3 months of high-dose chemo, 5-FU, leucovorin, adriamycin, and Cytoxan, randomized with growth factors. If you understand what all that means that I had to give myself nightly injections to bring my bone marrow back. It was hard. It was not just your going into the clinic and getting an hour and a half of intravenous. It was 3 days in a row. But I'd chosen to do it, so I had a positive outlook. I had 2 of the treatments back there, and then by my bugging them, I said, you know, this is really common stuff. Let me do this back in Montana. And they said, fine, go back to Montana and have it. And I got to have the last 3 treatments of that here at home. But then the second arm of the trial was to switch to Taxol. And for that, I had to have every treatment back in Washington, D.C. And it's not that Taxol is particularly new, but they were trying it in a new way. And the way that the trial had it lined up was intravenous delivery, continuous over 96 hours. It's 4 continuous days of slow drip Taxol. They gave me a pump and hooked me up. I put it in a fanny pack and went about my way for 4 days. And I finished that last Memorial Day, which time I had to go back for what they call final evaluation, more scans, to see where we had gone. Well, we checked it periodically to see, and I knew that it was having some effect, but it wasn't having the miraculous, spontaneous recovery that I had prayed for. But at the end of the treatment, which was 7 months, I had achieved about a 75% response rate, which meant that the tumor burden in my liver was reduced by 75%. Now that was very good news. The good news was that the cancer was responsive to the treatment, because going into it, of course, we didn't know whether it would even respond to the drugs. So it was very good news that it did. The bad part was I wanted it to all go away, and we couldn't achieve that. So I was never able to attain what they call remission, which is when it's gone. And they released me to the care of my local doc, and I came back home and had more decisions. What do I want to do? I still had cancer. And what do I want to do about that? I chose to go on tamoxifen. I knew that the tumors were estrogen positive, and chose to try the tamoxifen. So I've been on tamoxifen since last June. I continue to improve. Tamoxifen is working, and remain on the tamoxifen. 2 weeks ago, I had a periodic checkup, which showed that things are still responding nicely. But I had to learn this the hard way. Being assertive, I said, okay, tell me, how much disease do I still have? Oh, boy. The good news is I was smart enough to ask, and the bad news is they told me. And I still have considerable disease. So that, short of some kind of miracle, will never go away. And in this, when I read the report, my eyes went boing, because the radiologist compared it to the original disease. I didn't know it at the time that I had recurred, but one whole lobe of my liver was completely consumed with cancer. And I thought, oh boy, it's probably a good thing they didn't tell me. I might have thrown in the towel at that time. So I am still a cancer patient. I still have cancer. The prognosis is no one can offer me a cure. There's no known cure. I know that most women in my position die from this disease. And that, as you might imagine, has been a hard pill to swallow. I still have children to raise. And that supposedly is a 25-word or less version. So I've been in this loop for 11 years now. What have I learned? Well, first I learned to empower myself. Nobody, and I don't care how many degrees he has, bosses me around. Nobody tells me what to do. Sometimes it doesn't work out very favorably, but I found a doc that I'm comfortable with, and he's used to me, and we work well together. Not that I'm qualified for making these decisions, but who else is qualified to tell me how to live the rest of my life? So we're partners on that. We have to be partners. And it has to be decisions that I'm comfortable living with. So that was the first thing. And like these other ladies, I learned to treasure each day, one day at a time. It's hard to look way down the road and plan for the future, but what else have we got? So I live for today and hope for tomorrow. Make the most of each day. How it changed me, I have, honest to God, known women who said, cancer is the best thing that ever happened to me. And I remember looking at them thinking, you're crazy. And now I don't think they're crazy. I understand it. I don't agree with it personally. I still choose to think my children are the best thing that have happened to me. But boy, oh boy, what a life lesson. What a life lesson. I like to think I'm smart enough to learn from it and utilize it. So I don't spend much time in denial. I don't look back, don't second guess my decisions. I look forward and hope for the best. One thing that it's made me a better person. I'm sure of that. I'm kinder. I'm more patient. I'm gentler. I'm less judgmental. More easygoing. Maybe I'm more fun. I don't know. But I'm sure it's made me a better person. I'm less selfish. That's one way to put it. I'm less selfish. I know that, hey, the world does not revolve around me and my cancer. As time-consuming, as thought-consuming as it can, everybody has their problems. And a whole lot of them are a whole lot worse than mine. And I don't have to look very far to find people that have worse problems than me. So, I don't dwell on it. I just live my life. And cancer has forced me to look at myself very intently, to ask the hard questions, who am I and what is life all about, and what is this thing we call God? No one would ever accuse me of being a religious person, but I'm very spiritual, and my spirituality has deepened because of living with cancer. It's given me an opportunity and permission. It's given me permission to explore my spirituality so that if I want to talk about it, people don't have to roll their eyes. They understand that this is a part of me. And I have found friends who are comfortable with those kinds of conversations. I'm very active in my church. My church is a second family to me. And it's a real safe place to be. When I first joined the church and started saying, I'm a cancer survivor, you could just see people tighten up. But now, partly maybe because I keep it right in their faces, people don't tighten up when I talk about that anymore. And not just saying, I have cancer, but I have cancer and nobody can cure it, and let's talk about what this means about life and what this means about God, and let's talk about what this means about death and dying. And so members of church and I have these open conversations. They are uncomfortable at times, and I know that there are lots of people that don't want to hear this. So it's fine with me when I see them head out the door. But the feedback I've gotten because of my willingness to share and be open is overwhelming. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for talking about the tough topics. And that's been a gift. It's a gift that I wouldn't have seen coming, but I'm grateful for it. And not that I'm at the end of this spiritual journey. I look forward to exploring those issues more. But it feels like a good place to be. Feels real good. So that's where my heart's at, and that's where my head's at. I chose to incorporate some alternative medicine in my therapy, including meditation. And when I was going through chemo, I would meditate and visualize. It helped me immensely. And the images that worked with me were not pugilistic images. I could not embrace images of war or soldiers or fighting. It didn't work for me. I had to embrace images of love. And for me, music is a very important part of my life. So I use a lot of musical metaphors. And some people will talk about their fight with cancer. I don't generally talk about my fight with cancer. I see it as a dance. Sometimes it's an andante tempo, and sometimes it's allegro, and sometimes the cancer leads in the dance, and sometimes I lead. But we go back and forth, this partner I would not have chosen, but with whom I'm stuck in the dance of life. And it's a symphony. Sometimes it's melodious, sometimes it's cacophonous, but those are images that work for me rather than images of war and fighting and brutality, images of love and metaphors of music. So today I'm dancing with cancer and I'm leading. And it's a wonderful tune. Thank you.
My name's Townsend. I was 48 when I was diagnosed with cancer in December of 1990. I had gone for my annual checkup to see my OB/GYN person. I had not been to see her for 2.5 years because I had been working out of town, and I basically had she was my doctor, and I didn't find a new doctor in the community where I was living, and I knew it was a long-term temporary job, and I would just kind of wait till I got back. But when I got back in July of 1990, I was around for a little while and then made my appointment in December and went in to see her in very early December, and she was doing a manual of the breast, and she says, "Oops, there's a lump here. Haven't you felt this?" Well, I was not someone who had done my monthly breast self-exams, and the answer was no, I had not. But of course, as soon as she showed it to me, there was absolutely no problem in finding right where it was. So she scheduled me for a mammogram the next day, and I went in and had a mammogram, and she told me that she would call me if there was anything the matter. She didn't appeared to be very concerned about it, but she wanted it to get checked out. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a lawyer, and I work as a prosecutor here in Missoula. And so I was called the next day after the mammogram at work. And I had just gotten out of court. I was on a recess, and I was due back in a few minutes, okay? And I came into my office, and there was the note that said to call Lindsay, and so I said, well, I better call her. So I ran over to the telephone right out there in the kind of office, main reception area of the prosecutor's office, and called her up, and she got right on the phone, and she said, we're worried about your biopsy, or about your mammogram. We think you need a biopsy. Do you have a surgeon? I don't have a surgeon. I mean, who has a surgeon, right? And she said, well, if you don't, we can give you a couple of recommendations. And I mean, I knew the judge was coming back on the bench any minute, and it's like, how do I recover from this? And so I basically said, okay, I'll call and make an appointment, and you please make the referral. And I walked back into court because and the judge jumps down my case because I'm late, right? I mean, it's like, and I can't tell him, right? I mean, it's like, what's the matter? And he was a really kind, wonderful person, and if he had known, he never would have done that. But it's the sort of thing that it's not the kind of thing that you share at that point. So approximately, I went to have an appointment with the surgeon about a week. It wasn't all that long before I was able to get into it. I went with my husband, and we had talked about it, and he walks in, the surgeon walks in, and I look at him and I think, are you old enough to be a surgeon? I mean, and I looked, he went out for a couple of things, and the diplomas are on the wall, and I went to sort of check it out and to see how long he had been there, and he was just barely older than my child, based on sort of what I was guessing from this kind of business. But so we talked about the fact of what kind of surgery we might involve in and what some of the options were. And I asked him if he had some materials that he could give me and my husband to take home. We're book people. My husband is a professor at the university, and he's a real book person. And so one of the things that when these sorts of things come into our lives, we want to read about it. We want to do research. We want to try and find out things. And he really had nothing to give us. And in December of '90, basically where we went was to the public library, and the kinds of options that were there were pretty poor. There were not very many new books. And fortunately, we found not too long after that Susan Love's book, but there was not an awful lot out there. And so we did some reading and some consultation with him, and we began to see some other people as well. But we set up for a biopsy, and the biopsy was done on an outpatient basis. And so we are there, and he comes into the room after I'm back, and he just tells me, I'm sorry, it's cancer. And my husband's sitting there with me, and tears come down like that. And then it was just like, shit, right? I mean, that was the reaction, right? I mean, I was really angry about it. And then it was, well, now's the time to sort of really figure out what to do about it. I had not wanted to read anything up until that point. I mean, it was like, I think it was to some degree the denial process, and if I don't read about it, it really isn't there. But once I knew for sure, then it was important to me to try and find out. And the decision at that point, of course, became, after talking a little bit with the doctor about, are you going to decide on a mastectomy or are you going to do a lumpectomy? What he had found was a fairly small lump, but also another section in the same general area of the breast, which was the stellite pattern. So there were actually two sections that were removed on biopsy, both of which turned out to be cancerous, the little ones and the larger lump, but neither of which was very big, both in the lower left quadrant of the breast. And so the decision at least had to be for a node dissection, but what else were you going to do? His initial recommendation was to think fairly seriously about mastectomy, but I was not real keen. I'd sort of grown attached to this breast, and I didn't want to get rid of it without a real thinking about it. And so we decided to go and talk to some folks. And he was going on vacation, right? I mean, it was Christmas time, and he and his family were taking off for vacation. And so we knew at least we had some time, and after talking quickly with a physician, we figured it wasn't that critical to make your decision tomorrow. I mean, you had the time before he could come back. And so my husband and I spent the next month meeting with Kathy Marquette and meeting with John Troust and talking. My son had a friend of a father who was a cancer doctor in Wisconsin, and I mean, and just sort of scouring up all the kinds of resources and books that we could do. And our ultimate decision was the lumpectomy and an axillary dissection. And the check of the nodes showed to be nothing in the nodes, and so then the decision was, are you going to do any kind of adjuvant chemotherapy? And I initially looked at the possibility of being on a study. I thought when the doctor said, well, there is some indication that you might have some help by doing adjuvant chemotherapy, I thought to myself, if I don't do this, I'll be real mad if it would have done something, you know, so many years down the road. And so I'm willing to put up with a little bit for now, and that's my decision. Well, looking at the various tests that or protocols that I might have been eligible for, one of the protocols would have been no drugs. And since we had decided that I had decided I wanted it, we decided not to be part of a protocol. So the doctor and I chose the kind of chemotherapy. We chose not the andriamycin, so there was at least some indication that I wouldn't lose all my hair. And since I had some choice, that was the kind of choice we made. I did radiation first and chemotherapy second. I don't now remember why we did it that way. I know that's usually not the way people do it, but that was the way we did it for some reason. And over spring break that year, after I had finished radiation, but before I began chemotherapy, my husband and I took a spring break trip to San Francisco, and we shopped for a wig in case I would ever need it. I figured, well, this is, the opportunity of something that you should do, plus it was a chance to have some good times. One of the things I think that really helped me through all the kind of treatment is that right after I completed the surgery with the axillary dissection, I got involved in the breast cancer support group that was started, and that's where I met a number of people, and so I was in that group during the time that I was doing most of my treatment, as well as the number of years after that. It's the first time I'd ever been involved in the support group, but it was a significant help to me to talk about my disease and my fears, as well as lots of the other things that we were involved in to help me through it. When I finished radiation, I went into chemotherapy, and one of the things that I learned, and I basically handled radiation without much trouble. My appointment was 8 o'clock in the morning. I went there. I went to work. I just went on right on through. But with the chemotherapy, one of the things that happened to me is that I had a criminal trial, right after my first, within the next 2 or 3 days after my first dose of chemotherapy. And it was a sort of a run-of-the-mill trial, not a big deal. It only lasted a couple of days. But I was so exhausted, I could not handle it. And I had to go to my boss and tell him, look, I think I can handle the day-to-day stuff, but I can't do trial work. I know that I do not have the energy while I'm going to be undergoing this chemotherapy to do the trial work. And so my office really helped me through that time. They were more than understanding. They picked up some of my cases. I was able to basically keep working, but I wasn't able to really pull as much as I should have been done, and I can never be more grateful to those folks who helped me through that. One of the things that I do remember that was perhaps most difficult for me, and Annie asked us to touch a little bit about the professional kind of role, I did not make any secret about my diagnosis. I think everybody at the courthouse knew about it pretty quickly. I let folks know. But one of the interesting things was that in January of right after I had had my surgery, my diagnosis, but before I had started any significant treatment, the Missoulian did a little story about our office. And one of the things about the story was that my boss, Dusty, was talking about the fact that he was concerned about manpower, woman power in the office for the next period of time, because it was also the time that one of our regular lawyers was going to be gone at the legislature. Fred Van Valkenburg is a deputy county attorney, but every other year he's off for 4 months, fighting the good fight in Helena. And this was also the time that I was about to undergo treatment, and we just didn't know whether I would be able to work or not. And so Dusty was just sort of giving one of his normal little talks about, gee, I'm concerned, I don't know how I'm going to be able to handle the caseload. We may need some volunteer lawyers to help us out, prosecute the criminal cases that are coming up. And when they talked about me, they talked about me having some unspecified illness that they just didn't know what was going to happen. Well, that made me madder than if they'd come right out and said I had breast cancer. At the time, I'm the drug prosecutor. Okay, that's what I do. And my reaction when I read that is that, my God, people think I'm off in a detox center, right? That's going to look real good, right? And I talked to the Missoulian reporter who had done it afterwards, because I've known him for quite a long time, and I said, why didn't you just come right out and say what it was? And I told him what my reaction was, and he said, well, we wanted to protect your privacy. We were trying to be nice, and I said, well, you should have asked me, right? And I guess that was one of my kind of reactions throughout the whole thing. I found people, as other folks have said, tremendously supportive. I did find some people who were real uncomfortable. They didn't know what to say to me, And one of the things that I learned from this whole experience is when you learn that someone else has been diagnosed or has a problem, I don't think people care what you say. It's just the recognition that you're feeling sorry for them, and you want to let the people know that you're thinking about them. The folks who took the time to send me cards or letters or call or flowers or all the variety of kinds of things, I'll never forget them. And there was one woman in particular who was seriously ill with cancer, fighting her own battle, who took the time to write me a card and tell me that she was sorry that I had been diagnosed. And I'll never forget Sally and her kind of reaction. And I have felt that that's one of my obligations as I carry through. I basically, as I said, was able to work throughout most of my chemotherapy until about 5 months in. The primary reaction, and I had once a week I would go in and get a couple of shots. It was not the long-term drip, it was just sort of in and out. I tried to plan those for Friday afternoons so that if I had some problems I could sort of recover over the weekend and I would be okay to go back to work on Monday and hold my own. As it moved on toward the end of the summer, I found myself going home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because I was so tired, and just to try and take a nap. The appetite really went down, although I was not having significant problems with nausea, until basically in September. And then when it hit me. And I couldn't keep anything down, and I couldn't work. And finally the doctor just had to stop the chemotherapy because of the way, I lost weight just going off like mad, and people thought I looked like death warmed over, and they were really concerned about me. And so we finally just quit, and the doctor said, well, we really think that if it's going to do any good, it's going to do good in 3 months, and you've had 5, and we'll quit. Okay. That's okay with the way I was feeling at that point. That was fine with me. One of the things that Annie asked us to talk about was our family reaction. I had at that time, a grown-up son who was a graduate student at Stanford, and we called him to let him know about the diagnosis, and of course he was real shook up, scared about his mom. But his initial response to me was, well, Mom, I know you're just too tough. You're not going to let that stuff beat you, right? And it was nice to have him home at Christmas time to have a chance to talk about it. It wasn't all that long that we could do it. I think my dad had more trouble than most people did. It was like, even though I was 48 at the time, you know, I was still his little girl. And he had a real hard time talking about it. His response was, are you sure you have enough money to get through? I mean, that was kind of Dad's way of letting him know, letting me know, how is it that I can reach out and help you? And my sister, who is younger than me, my concern was, of course, are you going to the doctor? Have you had your checkups? And that was one of my first concerns back with her. And she hadn't. I mean, she hadn't been to a physician for a long time. And so I had to bully her into going and getting those kinds of checkups. After I finished treatment and I didn't really lose all my hair, I think most people really didn't know that the hair was gone. It thinned, but it didn't look too much different. But it came back naturally curly, and that was one of the benefits, I'd say, from chemotherapy. It's not what I would wish on anybody, but for a couple, 3 years, I had naturally curly hair, which is now gone again. But I think mostly I have learned about myself that, one, I don't have to spend all my time at the job. It gets done, even if I can't be there. 2, family and friends are really important. And 3, that you can make a difference in other people's life by recognizing the problems they're in if you'll just take that extra minute to send the card or a note or something. And I appreciate what I have learned from this disease. It's not the sort of thing that I would ever choose to get, but I guess I'm glad of some of the experiences that I've had with it, and especially the new people that I have met. I mean, there are people that I have met through this group and through our support group that I would not have met in any other kind of way, and I value their friendship and their support and their ideas. The last thing I guess I would say is that even though I feel fairly confident and I don't have to go to the doctor very often anymore, I mean, you sort of phase out on those things, it's never very far away. And I am more conscious than ever of news reports and stories. And tonight, there were 3 things on the nightly news about, or today, there's the new, quote, CIA technology for better mammograms that they're going to have. And then the 2 studies that were referenced about the long-term comparisons of lumpectomy versus mastectomy and survival rate, and the benefits of adjuvant chemotherapy even with node-negative individuals. And so it's interesting to see how before this disease, I think a lot of that would have sort of just skimmed over, but it never does now. I am more conscious of magazine articles and everything that talk about cancer and women's health issues. So, thank you.
My name is Myrna O'Hare, and I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 47, which was in November of 1993, November 24th, 1993. These dates, the diagnosis, when you have your mastectomy, it's like dates like when your children were born. You'll never forget those dates as long as you live. The date that my surgeon told me that the lump was cancerous was 20 years to the day from the day that my mother died of breast cancer. And I was very disturbed. It was a hard time for me. I had 2 teenage daughters. I still have 2 daughters. One is 18 now, one is 21. They're not teenagers anymore. I was in the room by myself, and my youngest daughter had come to pick me up. This was to be just a simple biopsy. I didn't expect this at all. Didn't have any inkling that this was cancerous. It was just an unusual shaped outline on the mammogram a mammogram that I have had every other year since I was 30 years old because of what had happened to my mom. So I was disturbed, very disturbed. And Erin walks in the room and my face is just white as a sheet, she tells me, and I'm crying. And I tell her, and I think that Erin has had the most trouble of the two girls because of this. She is she holds her emotions in, and I think she's been very angry and very frightened, more frightened than anger, but the anger comes out. So I've tried to talk to her, and we still have some problems, but I think she's better now because I've been very fortunate and I've been able to handle my cancer and work through it. Brianna's been wonderful support for me. She has come to most of these meetings and been here for me throughout. So, and one of the topics, I'm skipping a little bit here, but the relationships has been difficult with the girls because my mother died of cancer, here I have it, and now what's their future going to be? Is it genetic? Is it something that we're doomed? We're just going to have to expect it? I don't know. When my mom died, I'm an only child. I had no support whatsoever. I just had to handle it. And it was difficult because we lived in the town where she passed away, and I would not go to that hospital for the entire time we lived there, over 8 years. I would call people, I'd wait till they get out, but I wouldn't even go to that hospital because it frightened me so much. And the topic of breast cancer, I tried to avoid it because I just didn't want to think about it. I knew I had to have my mammograms every other year and do self-examination, but I just didn't want to think about what would happen if I got it. And because it was a hard time for Mom. She went through an awfully lot. It was very short and very fast and very painful. And so I had that memory all the time that I had to keep pushed back into my mind. So we got through it. I had a small tumor, completely in situ. So I chose mastectomy rather than a lumpectomy. I had the choice. If I did lumpectomy, I would have to have radiation. But I didn't want to mess with radiation. I was frightened of it. My mom had had it. She had had chemotherapy. It was horrible. This was 20 years ago. I chose, as it says, as Annie was saying, I chose to cut it off. Let's get it done and over with so I can get on with my life. And that's what I did. So I didn't have chemotherapy. I didn't have radiation. The doctor felt that I didn't need to have any lymph nodes checked or removed. I just went on tamoxifen. And I've been on it since the 1st of January 1994. So it's been over a year. I haven't had many side effects, a few headaches, a little change in my eyes. They say sometimes that's a side effect, but that's evened out, and that's all I've done. I take tamoxifen, and I go on. It's never far away. I'm always thinking about it, and I'm always reading about it now. Everything I can find out about it, I read. So I'm not avoiding it like I used to, but it's hard to deal with. And it's hard sometimes to move on, but I've had wonderful support. I think that is the most crucial thing we can do, is to reach out. The night I found out I was going to have a lumpectomy or mastectomy, I hadn't even made up my mind yet. I started calling everybody I knew that had any kind of cancer. That breast cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma, lung cancer, anything. I just talked to them. And I tried to reach out. I told my boss what I was faced with. That you probably wouldn't see much of me for the next 6 months. And he gave me Annie's name, and he told me to call Karen. And from there, we got into support groups. I got associated with the Cancer Resource Network and the people here at St. Pat's. They saved my life mentally, because I have to talk about it, and I needed people to tell me it would be okay, that there's hope and that there's a way to get through this. So that's very important, is relationships, is seeking out people that will help you if all you have to do is ask them or talk to them. So that's what's changed me. My attitude toward my friends, toward my family has somehow changed. I value their love and their concern so much more. I guess I cultivate my relationships now than I did, much more than I used to. So I try to watch my diet more. I try to spend more time with my family, and reach out to other people who might need support. The next question, what would I have done differently? You know, I've been thinking about these points for a long time, since Annie sent me this letter. I wouldn't have done anything differently. And that's, maybe I've had my head stuck in the sand, but I've always tried to have the mammograms as recommended by my doctor. I did the self-exam. I don't smoke, I don't drink. I tried to eat healthy all along, and yet I still got cancer. What could I have done differently? I sat down and I tried to examine what I've done. I exercise, we go hiking. I didn't know what I could have done differently, so I guess nothing. It just happened. Maybe stress. Maybe I should have approached life more calmly, but you don't know that at the time. Hindsight is wonderful. You live your life. There are things that go up, things that go down. You have to cope, and sometimes that takes a little stress. Well, you can't live in a vacuum. So, my future. That's a real hard one for me. I have 2 daughters who are worried now. I'm sure they are. They can't help but be. What's their future going to be like? So I want to support them as much as I can, and I want to reach out and help everybody else that has to face what I've had to face. I live each day. I pray, and I thank God for my blessings, and I believe that I have as much a future as anyone else. I'm going to look at it like that. I look at life as anyone else should look at life. We go on, we do the best that we can, and we be happy. So that's the way I look at it, and that's the way I've always looked at it. There's peaks and valleys, and you just you stay happy. Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Do you have any things you'd like to know more about? There's coffee. Visit a little bit. Get yourself some moving around. This has been riveting. I noticed I wasn't moving. Thank you very much.